No one spoke to Marcus Hartwell. Not if they valued their job. Not if they understood power. The millionaire moved through his glass tower like winter itself, cold, untouchable, alone by design. Employees scattered when he approached. Board members chose their words like minefields. For 20 years, he'd built walls so high that even he forgot what existed beyond them. Then one morning at dawn, in an empty corridor on the 47th floor, an 8-year-old girl offered him a cookie. And everything Marcus had fought to protect began to crumble. This is the story of how kindness broke a fortress. Welcome to the channel, everyone. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing this global community grow. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because you don't want to miss what happens next. Trust me. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The elevator doors opened to the 47th floor at exactly 5:47 a.m., and Marcus Hartwell stepped into his kingdom of glass and steel. Silence greeted him. It always did. His footsteps echoed against the polished marble, a sound he'd grown to crave. No voices. No questions. No expectations beyond the ones he set for himself. Just the hum of servers in the distance and the faint whistle of wind against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a Manhattan still draped in pre-dawn darkness. Marcus didn't turn on the lights in the hallway. He knew every step by heart. 14 paces to the corner office. His office. The one with his name etched in platinum letters on frosted glass. Marcus Hartwell, founder and CEO, Hartwell Technologies. He built this. Every line of code, every contract, every ruthless negotiation that had transformed a foster kid from Newark into one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the tech industry. 34 years old, and he'd already conquered what most people spent lifetimes chasing. But conquest, he'd learned, was a cold mistress. Inside his office, Marcus set his briefcase down with mechanical precision. Like no sugar, went on the right side of his desk. Laptop opened at a 45-degree angle. Phone face down always. The routine never varied. Variation meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness. Weakness was unacceptable. The city began to wake beyond his windows. Lights flickered on in distant apartments. Early traffic crawled along the avenues like sluggish rivers of red and white. Marcus watched it all from his tower, separate, untouchable. Exactly how he preferred it. His employees called him the Ice King. He'd heard the whispers in break rooms, seen the way people scattered when he approached. Fear meant respect. Respect meant they stayed in line, did their jobs, didn't waste his time with small talk or pointless pleasantries. He'd learned that lesson young, in foster homes where kindness was currency and currency always ran out. Where getting close to someone meant watching them leave. Where trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. So he'd stopped affording it. By 6:15 a.m., Marcus was deep into quarterly projections when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in his carefully orchestrated world. Humming. Soft, childish, meandering through the hallways like a lost melody. Marcus's jaw tightened. The cleaning crew wasn't supposed to be on this floor until 7. He'd specifically arranged his schedule to avoid them, to maintain these precious hours of solitude before the office filled with people who needed things from him, wanted things from him, expected him to be the Marcus Hartwell they'd read about in Forbes and TechCrunch. The humming grew closer. He stood, irritation flaring hot in his chest. Whoever this was, they'd be reported to building management. Rules existed for a reason. Schedules existed for a reason. His entire empire was built on the foundation of order, and someone was currently tap dancing across that foundation in A child appeared in his doorway. Marcus froze. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, all wild dark curls and bright eyes that hadn't yet learned to look away from uncomfortable things. She wore a purple backpack covered in star stickers and carried a worn lunchbox decorated with cartoon astronauts. For several heartbeats, they simply stared at each other. "Hi," the girl said finally, as if encountering a millionaire CEO at dawn in an empty skyscraper was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus's mouth opened. No words came. When was the last time someone had caught him completely off guard? When was the last time someone had looked at him without that mixture of fear and calculation he'd grown so accustomed to seeing? "I'm Elena," she continued, unbothered by his silence. "My mom's the janitor." "Maria Rodriguez?" "She cleans your floor every night." "Your mother," Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "Your mother should be working alone." "She's sick." Elena said it matter-of-factly, but something flickered across her face. Worry maybe. Fear that she was trying very hard to hide. "Threw up all morning. But we can't afford for her to miss work, so I told her I'd come. I can be really quiet. You won't even know I'm here." Marcus felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. He recognized that look on the girl's face, the premature responsibility, the adult concerns living behind child's eyes. He'd worn that same expression once, a lifetime ago. "This is a corporate building," he said, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. "There are liability issues. Insurance regulations. Your mother could lose her job if. Please don't fire her." Elena's words came out in a rush. "Please. We need this job. She works 3 jobs, and she's so tired all the time, and our landlord says if we're late with rent one more time." She stopped abruptly, as if suddenly aware she'd said too much. The uncomfortable feeling in Marcus's chest intensified. He should call security. Follow protocol. Maintain the boundaries that kept his world functioning exactly as it should. But he couldn't look away from this girl who was trying so hard to be brave. "I'm not going to fire your mother," he heard himself say. "But you can't be up here." "It's not. I brought homework." Elena hoisted her backpack like evidence. "And my tablet for when I finish. I'll sit in the hallway corner. You won't even see me." Before Marcus could respond, she reached into her lunchbox and pulled out something wrapped in a napkin. She approached his desk with the fearlessness of someone who hadn't yet learned that men like him were supposed to be approached with caution. "You look like you haven't eaten breakfast," she said, setting the napkin on his desk. "My mom always says breakfast is important. It's a cookie. I made them with my abuela yesterday. Chocolate chip." Marcus stared at the napkin like it was a live grenade. When was the last time someone had given him something without wanting something in return? Without an angle, without an agenda, without calculating the return on their investment? He couldn't remember. "I don't," he started. "It's okay if you don't want it," Elena said quickly, already backing toward the door. "I just thought, you're here so early, and nobody should start their day alone without at least a cookie, you know?" She smiled then, a genuine, uncomplicated smile that held no fear of him, no awareness of his net worth, no concern for his reputation. She smiled at him the way someone might smile at a neighbor, at a friend, at a human being rather than a corporate titan. And then she was gone, humming her way back down the hallway. Marcus stood frozen in his office as the sun finally crested the horizon, flooding his glass fortress with golden light. The cookie sat on his desk, still wrapped in its napkin, completely disrupting the careful geometry of his workspace. He should throw it away. Resume his projections. forget this strange interruption to his routine. Instead, he found himself slowly unwrapping the napkin. The cookie was slightly misshapen, clearly homemade, with chocolate chips that had melted in irregular patterns. It was imperfect and amateur and completely at odds with everything in his precisely controlled environment. Marcus picked it up. The cookie was still warm. Somewhere down the hallway, Elena had started humming again. And Marcus Hartwell, who hadn't accepted an unearned kindness in over 20 years, who'd built walls so high that even he sometimes forgot what existed beyond them, took a bite. It tasted like something he'd forgotten existed. It tasted like humanity. The sun rose higher over Manhattan, lights spilling across the fortress where a man had once believed himself untouchable. And in that light, holding a misshapen cookie made by a child's hands, Marcus felt the first crack form in the ice. He didn't know it yet, but nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 2. Marcus couldn't concentrate. The quarterly projections blurred on his screen. The market analysis reports might as well have been written in another language. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted to the empty napkin on his desk, evidence of something he couldn't quite name. By 7:30 a.m., his executive assistant Jennifer arrived, punctual as always. She froze in the doorway when she saw him standing at the window instead of buried in his laptop. "Mr. Hartwell? Is everything all right?" "Fine," he said without turning around. "Clear my 9 o'clock. I'll take the call from here." He could feel her confusion radiating across the room. In 3 years, he'd never rescheduled a meeting. Never deviated from the calendar she maintained with military precision. "Of course," she said carefully. Is there anything you need?" A time machine, he thought. A way to unknow what simple kindness feels like. "No," he said. "That's all." When she left, Marcus pulled out his phone and did something he'd never done in his entire tenure as CEO. He Googled his own building's janitorial staff. Maria Rodriguez, 42 years old. Employed by Cornerstone Cleaning Services for 6 years. 3 documented commendations for excellence. No disciplinary records. No mention of a daughter. No mention of 3 jobs or medical issues, or a landlord making threats. The corporate world, Marcus thought bitterly, only tracked what it valued. And it clearly didn't value Maria Rodriguez beyond her ability to make offices shine. He'd been that invisible once. A ghost in the foster care system. Case number 17 to 4892. Nobody had known his dreams, his fears, his hunger that went beyond food. Nobody had looked at him and seen a person who mattered. He'd sworn he'd never be invisible again. The cost of that promise was standing in a corner office at the top of the world, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in the group homes of his childhood. The next morning, Marcus arrived at 5:30 a.m. He told himself it was to get an early start on the Singapore merger. Told himself it had nothing to do with a girl with star stickers on her backpack and a smile that didn't know enough to be afraid of him. But when Elena appeared at 6:15, her purple backpack bouncing, he felt something in his chest release, something he hadn't realized was holding his breath. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus." She waved from the hallway. Marcus is fine." He stepped into the doorway, uncertain. "How's your mother?" "Better. She kept food down yesterday." Elena beamed like this was the greatest victory in the world. Maybe it was. "She's cleaning the 32nd floor. I'm supposed to stay here and do my reading homework." She settled onto the floor in the hallway corner, pulling out a worn library book. Marcus watched her for a moment, this small person who'd somehow inserted herself into his carefully ordered existence. "There's a conference room," he said. With a table. It's more comfortable than the floor. Elena looked up, surprised. Really? You don't mind? He minded. He minded because it meant disruption, meant deviation from routine, meant allowing someone into his space in a way he hadn't permitted in years. I don't mind, he lied. She gathered her things and followed him to the conference room adjacent to his office. Through the glass walls, he could watch her settle in, spreading her homework across the table with the satisfied air of someone claiming territory. Marcus tried to return to work. Found himself watching Elena mouth words as she read, her finger tracing lines across the page. At 7 a.m., she appeared in his doorway again. What do you do? She asked. Like, for your job? I run a technology company. We develop software for. He stopped. The explanation he gave to shareholders and board members felt hollow here. We make computer programs that help businesses work better. That sounds boring. Despite himself, Marcus almost smiled. Sometimes it is. What do you do that's not boring? The question landed like a punch. When was the last time he'd done anything that wasn't work? When was the last time he'd existed outside these walls, beyond the endless cycle of meetings and acquisitions and proving himself again and again to a world that would never quite forget where he came from? He had no answer. Elena seemed to sense she'd wandered into uncomfortable territory. She reached into her backpack and pulled out another napkin-wrapped bundle. I brought you another cookie, she said softly. In case yesterday's wasn't enough. Marcus stared at the offering. This child, whose mother scrubbed toilets to keep a roof over their heads, was sharing her food with a millionaire. The absurdity of it struck him. The beauty of it devastated him. Elena, you don't have to. I know, she interrupted. But you look like you need it. You look. She tilted her head, studying him with unsettling perception. You look like you're hungry for something nobody's feeding you. The words hit bone deep. Marcus took the cookie. Their fingers brushed for a moment, hers small and warm, his cold from gripping a coffee cup for the past hour. Thank you, he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in years. Elena smiled that uncomplicated smile again, and Marcus felt another crack form in the fortress he'd built around himself. After she returned to the conference room, Marcus unwrapped the cookies slowly, ceremonially. He thought about the life he'd constructed, the empire, the reputation, the carefully maintained distance from anything that could hurt him. He thought about a little girl who came to work with her sick mother because they couldn't afford not to. He thought about invisibility and what it cost to be seen. And sitting in his corner office overlooking a city that knew his name but not his story, Marcus Hartwell took a bite of a homemade chocolate chip cookie and tasted something dangerous. He tasted hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the walls he'd built to keep the world out were actually keeping him in. Hope that somewhere between the child he'd been and the man he'd become, he'd lost something worth finding again. Hope that it wasn't too late. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Inside, a fortress began to crumble. One cookie at a time. Chapter 3. 3 weeks passed, and Marcus Hartwell found himself doing something unprecedented. He started arriving at 5:15 a.m. Not for work. Not for the silence. But for the 15 minutes before Elena appeared, when he could prepare himself for the day's conversation. When he could rehearse being something other than the Ice King everyone expected. It terrified him how much he looked forward to those mornings. What's your favorite planet? Elena asked one Tuesday, her homework forgotten beside her half-eaten cookie. I don't have one, Marcus said automatically. Everyone has a favorite planet. That's like saying you don't have a favorite color. I don't have a favorite color either. Elena's eyes widened with the kind of horror usually reserved for natural disasters. That's so sad. How do you even live? Marcus almost laughed. When was the last time he'd laughed? I manage. Well, mine's Saturn, she declared. Because it has rings, and rings are like promises. Like the planet is married to its moons forever. She looked at him expectantly. Now you have to pick one. He thought about it, really thought about it in a way he hadn't considered anything frivolous in years. Jupiter, he said finally. It's the largest, the most powerful. That makes sense, Elena said, but something in her tone suggested disappointment. That's very cute. What does that mean? You always pick the biggest, strongest thing. The most important thing. She tilted her head. But important isn't the same as special. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Everything in Marcus's life was important, critical, essential. But special? That required something he'd forgotten how to access. That night, Marcus found himself in a part of the city he never visited, a small astronomy shop in Brooklyn. He bought a telescope. A good one. The kind that could see Saturn's rings. He had it delivered to his penthouse and never told Elena about it. But he spent hours that week learning constellations, studying planets, preparing for conversations he knew were coming. Preparing to be special instead of just important. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Hartwell? Jennifer asked after he smiled, actually smiled, at her during a morning briefing. I'm fine. It's just, you seem different lately. She hesitated. Lighter, maybe? Different. Lighter. Words that had no place in Marcus Hartwell's vocabulary. But they were true. He caught himself humming Elena's melody in the elevator. Started keeping the conference room lights on even when she wasn't there. Found reasons to walk past the 32nd floor when he knew Maria was working, though he never stopped to introduce himself. What would he even say? Your daughter is teaching me how to be human again? The really dangerous part was how natural it all felt. How easy it was to let Elena's orbit pull him away from the cold distance he'd maintained for so long. In the boardroom, though, that distance was cracking in ways that weren't so comfortable. Marcus, you've been distracted, David Chen, his CFO, said after a particularly unfocused strategy meeting. The Singapore deal needs your full attention. This isn't like you. It wasn't like him. Nothing about the past 3 weeks was like him. That was precisely the point. On a Thursday morning in the 4th week, Elena didn't come. Marcus told himself it didn't matter. Told himself he was relieved to have his routine back, his solitude restored. By 7 a.m., he was checking the hallway for the 3rd time. By 8 a.m., he'd called building security. I need to know if Maria Rodriguez is working today. The pause. Is there a problem with the cleaning, Mr. Hartwell? Just answer the question. She's not on the schedule, sir. Called in sick yesterday. Marcus hung up and stared at his phone. This wasn't his business. Maria's health, her schedule, her life, none of it concerned him. He had a company to run, deals to close, an empire that demanded his constant attention. But all he could think about was Elena's worried face that first morning. We can't afford for her to miss work. He pulled up the building management's employee records, the ones he technically shouldn't have access to but did because he owned 40% of the building. Maria Rodriguez. 3 documented absences in the past month, all unpaid. Current address, 2847 Walton Avenue, apartment 4C, Bronx. Marcus's finger hovered over the address. Crossing this line meant something. meant he couldn't pretend this was just a passing interest, a temporary disruption to his carefully controlled existence. It meant admitting that somewhere in the past month, a little girl with star stickers and homemade cookies had become more important than quarterly projections. He grabbed his coat. The Bronx neighborhood was a world away from Manhattan's glass towers. Buildings wore their age in cracked facades and rusted fire escapes. But there was life here, real life. Music drifting from open windows, neighbors calling to each other, children playing in the street despite the cold. Marcus felt like an intruder. His tailored suit, his luxury car parked at the curb, everything about him screamed outsider. He found apartment 4C. Stood outside the door for a full minute before knocking. Maria Rodriguez answered. She was younger than he expected, but exhaustion aged her, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. When she saw who stood in her doorway, confusion flickered across her face, followed quickly by fear. "Mr. Hartwell? I'm so sorry, I know I missed work, but I have a doctor's note, and I'll make up the hours, I promise." "Where's Elena?" The question came out sharper than intended. Maria's fear deepened. "She's at school." "But did she do something?" "I told her to stay quiet, to not bother anyone." "She didn't do anything wrong." Marcus forced his voice to soften. She wasn't there this morning. I wanted to make sure she was okay." The fear in Maria's eyes transformed into something worse. Understanding. The kind that came with recognizing exactly how precarious her position was, how much power this man in her doorway held over her survival. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't fire me. I know Elena shouldn't have been there. I know it was against policy. But I had no choice and I'm not here to fire you." "Then why are you here?" It was the question Marcus had been asking himself for the past hour. For the past month. Maybe for the past 20 years. Why was he here? What did he want? What was he hoping to find in this cramped hallway that smelled of cooking spices and old paint? "I don't know," he admitted. And in that admission, standing in a building that could fit inside his penthouse lobby, Marcus Hartwell finally understood what Elena had seen in him that first morning. He was hungry. Not for power or success or validation. For connection. For meaning. For the kind of wealth that couldn't be calculated in quarterly earnings. For family. "She talks about you," Maria said quietly, watching him with careful eyes. "Every day. Mr. Marcus this, Mr. Marcus that. You're the first person outside our family who's been kind to her in a long time." The words hit like a confession. Marcus looked at this woman who worked 3 jobs to keep her daughter fed and housed. Who cleaned his floors at night while he sat in his tower, lonely in his abundance. Who had more wealth in the love of one child than he'd accumulated in all his years of conquest. "I'd like to help," he said. "If you'll let me." Maria's expression hardened. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's, what was it? Investment? Friendship? A desperate attempt to prove he was more than the sum of his bank accounts? It's what neighbors do," he finished. The lie tasted like truth. Chapter 4. Maria didn't accept his help. Not that day, not the next week, not even when Marcus, through carefully anonymous channels, tried to pay her overdue rent. The building manager called to inform him the payment had been refused. "Ms. Rodriguez said she doesn't accept money from strangers," the manager explained, confusion evident in his voice. "I tried to tell her it was anonymous, but she said she knew exactly where it came from." Marcus hung up, frustrated and oddly impressed. Maria Rodriguez had more backbone than most of his board members. Elena, however, had no such reservations about their friendship. She returned to the 47th floor the following Monday with a drawing. Marcus surrounded by stars, his name spelled out in careful block letters above a smiling stick figure. "Mom says I shouldn't bother you so much," Elena said, handing it over. "But I made you this anyway. For your office. So it's less boring." Marcus looked at the drawing. Childish, imperfect, the most valuable thing anyone had given him in years. "Thank you," he managed. "I'll put it right here." He taped it to the wall beside his monitor, where client presentations and profit margins used to be the only decoration. Jennifer's eyebrows nearly left her face when she saw it during their morning briefing. But she said nothing. Nobody said anything. They just watched as Marcus Hartwell, the Ice King, slowly melted. The board meeting on the second Tuesday of November should have been routine. Marcus had spent a decade making these meetings routine, presenting numbers, asserting dominance, reminding everyone why he deserved the crown he'd fought so hard to claim. But that morning, Elena had asked him about stars again. "Do you think people become stars when they die?" she'd wondered aloud, her voice carrying that particular softness that meant she was thinking about something painful. "My abuela died last year. Mom says she's watching over us. But I want to know if she can actually see us, you know? Like, scientifically." Marcus had found himself talking about light, about how photons traveled across impossible distances, about how technically yes, if someone became energy, became light, they could theoretically touch every corner of the universe. He'd been so absorbed in making death make sense for an 8-year-old that he'd barely prepared for the meeting. Now, sitting at the head of the conference table with 14 pairs of eyes watching him, Marcus realized his mistake. The Singapore merger, Davidson prompted when Marcus missed his cue. "You are going to walk us through the final terms?" Marcus looked down at his notes. The numbers swam. All he could think about was Elena's face when he'd told her about light traveling forever, how she'd smiled and said, "So Abuela really can see us. She's in the light." "Marcus." David's voice had an edge now. "The terms are favorable," Marcus said, but even he could hear the flatness in his own voice. "We're positioned to close by end of quarter." That's the summary we already have. This from Patricia Morrison, the board member who'd been gunning for his position since day one. "We need specifics. Projections. Risk analysis. The detail work." The detail work. The meticulous preparation that had always been Marcus's signature move. His proof that he belonged in this room at this table, wearing this crown. He had nothing. "I'll have a full briefing by end of week," he said. Patricia leaned forward. "That's not good enough. We need this now. We're talking about a $140 million acquisition. What's going on with you, Marcus? For the past month, you've been..." "I've been what?" The words came out sharp. "Defensive. Distracted." Patricia said it like an accusation. Like a weakness she'd been waiting to exploit. Unfocused. Frankly, absent even when you're in the room. The Marcus Hartwell we know doesn't show up unprepared. He doesn't miss details. He doesn't lose his edge. The silence that followed was damning. Because she was right. Marcus had lost his edge. Had let his attention drift from the empire he'd built to a little girl with questions about stars and a mother who cleaned floors and refused charity. He'd let himself become vulnerable. And in the corporate world, vulnerability was blood in the water. The hostile takeover attempt came 3 days later. Marcus was in his office when David burst in, face pale. "We have a problem. Morrison's been buying up shares through shell companies. She's got enough support for a vote of no confidence." The words should have triggered panic. Should have sent Marcus into battle mode, ready to defend what was his. Instead, he felt oddly calm. How long do I have? The vote's scheduled for Monday. For days. David stared at him. Marcus, this is your company. Your life's work. You need to fight this. I know. Then why are you just sitting there? Good question. Why was he sitting there, staring at a child's drawing on his wall, thinking about cookies and star stickers and what it meant to be special instead of just important? Because somewhere in the past month, he'd started questioning what he was fighting for. I'll handle it, Marcus said, but his heart wasn't in the promise. That evening he stayed late. Later than usual. The cleaning crew came through, Maria on the 32nd floor, careful to avoid the 47th where the man who'd shown up at her door might be waiting. But Marcus didn't go to her. Didn't push. Just sat in his office, watching the city lights, thinking about empires and what they cost. At 9:47 p.m., building security called up. Mr. Hartwell? There's a letter for you. From it, Elena Rodriguez? She dropped it off after school. Said it was important. Marcus's chest tightened. Bring it up. The envelope was purple, covered in more star stickers. Inside, notebook paper with careful handwriting. Dear Mr. Marcus, Mom says you came to our house. She won't tell me why, but she seems worried. Are you okay? You seem sad lately. More sad than when we first met. I told my teacher about you for my assignment on Everyday Heroes. I said you're important because you're rich, but you're special because you tried to help my mom even though she's just a janitor. I hope whatever is making you sad goes away soon. I'm bringing extra cookies tomorrow just in case. Your friend, Elena. P.S. I looked up Jupiter. It's not just big and strong. It protects all the smaller planets from asteroids. So I was wrong. It's not just important. It's special too. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he looked at his calendar. Monday's board meeting. The vote that would determine whether he kept his crown or lost everything he'd spent a lifetime building. And Thursday was Elena's school science fair. She'd mentioned it twice, casually, the way kids do when they desperately want you to come but are too afraid to actually ask. Mom probably can't come, she'd said. She has to work. But it's okay. I'm used to it. The choice crystallized in that moment with painful clarity. Fight for his empire, prove he still had the edge, defend the fortress he'd built brick by bloody brick. Or show up for a little girl who saw him as a hero, not because of his net worth, but because he'd tried to be kind. Marcus looked at his phone. Looked at the calendar. Looked at Elena's drawing on his wall. His stick figure self surrounded by stars, smiling in a way the real Marcus Hartwell hadn't smiled in 20 years. The science fair was Thursday at 2 p.m. The board meeting was Monday at 9 a.m. He could do both. Could compartmentalize. Could fight the takeover and still make the science fair. That was the smart play. The strategic move. But Thursday at 2 p.m. was also when Patricia Morrison had scheduled the follow-up meeting, the one where she'd present her vision for the company's future under new leadership. The meeting where Marcus's absence would be seen as surrender. She'd done it on purpose. Forced him to choose. And looking at Elena's letter, at her faith in him as something more than his balance sheet, Marcus Hartwell realized he already had. Some empires were worth losing. Some crowns were worth setting down. Some battles were less important than being there when a little girl presented her science project to an audience that should have included her mother but would have to settle for a millionaire who was just learning what it meant to be rich. Marcus picked up his phone. "David," he said when his CFO answered, "I need you to clear my calendar for Thursday afternoon." "Marcus, that's when Morrison's—" "I know exactly when it is." He looked at Elena's drawing, at the stick figure smiling among the stars. "I'll be at PS 142. If the board wants me, they can wait." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Are you sure about this?" David finally asked. Marcus wasn't sure about anything anymore, except that for the first time in his life, he was choosing connection over conquest. And that terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever could. "I'm sure," he lied. But as he taped Elena's letter beside her drawing, Marcus thought maybe, just maybe, he was finally learning the difference between important and special, even if it cost him everything. Chapter 5. Monday's board meeting lasted 17 minutes. Marcus presented his case, the projections, the risk analysis, the meticulous detail work he'd compiled over the weekend. Every number was flawless. Every argument was airtight. It didn't matter. "We appreciate your preparation, Marcus," Patricia Morrison said, her smile sharp as broken glass. "But preparation isn't the issue. Leadership is. Vision is. And frankly, your head hasn't been in this game for weeks." The vote of no confidence passed 9-5. Just like that, Marcus Hartwell lost majority control of the company he'd built from nothing. The empire he'd sacrificed everything to create was no longer his to command. He should have felt devastated. Should have felt the rage that had fueled him through every obstacle he'd ever faced. Instead, walking out of that boardroom for what might be the last time, Marcus felt something unexpected. Relief. The business press had a field day. Tech Wunderkind's fall from grace. Wall Street Journal. How Marcus Hartwell lost his edge. Forbes. The Ice King melts. A cautionary tale. TechCrunch. His phone exploded with calls. Investors. Reporters. Former allies smelling blood. Marcus ignored them all. He had somewhere more important to be. PS 142 elementary school smelled like floor wax and poster paint and childhood, a smell Marcus hadn't encountered in over 25 years. The gymnasium had been transformed into a science fair wonderland. Trifold boards displaying volcanoes and solar systems and experiments on plant growth. Parents everywhere, cameras ready, pride evident on their faces. Marcus stood in the doorway in his tailored suit, feeling more out of place than he'd ever felt in any boardroom. Then he saw her. Elena, standing beside a display board covered in stars and glitter and photographs. Her purple backpack sat at her feet. She was adjusting a model solar system that wobbled slightly on its base, her face tight with concentration. And beside her, wearing her cleaning uniform because she'd come straight from her morning shift at a different building, stood Maria Rodriguez. Marcus's throat tightened. Elena spotted him first. Her face lit up like a supernova. "Mr. Marcus." She waved frantically. "You came. You actually came." Maria turned, and Marcus saw the complicated mix of emotions cross her face. Surprise, wariness, something that might have been gratitude. He approached slowly, aware of the stares from other parents. Aware that he looked exactly like what he was, a millionaire who just lost his empire, showing up at an elementary school science fair. "I told you I would," Marcus said to Elena. "I know, but adults say lots of things they don't mean." She grabbed his hand, unself-conscious, trusting, and pulled him toward her display. "My project is about everyday heroes." The board was divided into sections. One showed Maria in her cleaning uniform, with a paragraph about working 3 jobs. Another showed firefighters and teachers and doctors. And in the center, larger than the rest, was a photograph Elena must have taken with her tablet. Marcus in his office, looking down at one of her drawings with an expression he'd never seen on his own face before. Softness. Connection. Something almost like peace. The title read, "Heroes Protect Others. How Mr. Marcus Showed Me That Being Rich Means Nothing If You're Not Kind." Marcus couldn't breathe. "Elena," Maria said softly, concern in her voice. "I told you." "It's perfect," Marcus interrupted, his voice rough. "It's absolutely perfect." Elena beamed. Then, with the shamelessness only children possess, she asked, "Do you want to help me explain it to the judges? Mom has to leave soon for her next shift." Marcus looked at Maria. Really looked at her. This woman who worked herself to exhaustion for her daughter, who refused charity but accepted kindness, who'd raised a child with so much wisdom it put Marcus's expensive education to shame. "Actually," he said carefully, "I was hoping to talk to your mother. If that's all right." Maria's expression became guarded. "Mr. Hartwell." "Marcus. Please." He took a breath. "I'm not here to offer you money. Or to make you uncomfortable. I'm here because—" How did he explain it? How did he put into words what the past month had taught him? "I'm here because your daughter taught me something I'd forgotten. That wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you share. And I'd like to share something with you both if you'll let me." "What?" Maria asked, suspicious. "Time," Marcus said simply. "I have a lot of it now. As of this morning, I'm no longer CEO of Hartwell Technologies." Maria's eyes widened. Elena gasped. "What happened?" "I made a choice," Marcus said. "I chose to be here instead of at a meeting that would have saved my company. And you know what? I'd make the same choice again." He looked at Maria. "I know you don't want charity. I respect that. But I'm hoping you might want a friend. Maybe even a partner." "A partner in what?" Marcus smiled. A real smile, the kind that didn't calculate or strategize. "I'm not entirely sure yet. But I have resources. I have skills. I have this suddenly empty schedule. And I have this stubborn desire to do something that matters. Something that's not just important, but special." He gestured to Elena's project. "Your daughter sees everyday heroes. People who protect others. Maybe I could learn to be one of those. Starting with helping a family that's been protecting me from my own loneliness for the past month." Maria studied him for a long moment. Marcus felt exposed under her gaze in a way no boardroom scrutiny had ever made him feel. "You really gave up your company to come to a school science fair?" she finally asked. "I really did." "That's either very noble or very stupid." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. Elena tugged on his sleeve. "Does this mean you're not a millionaire anymore?" "Oh, I'm still a millionaire," Marcus said. "I just don't run the company anymore." "There's a difference." "Good," Elena said matter-of-factly. "Because I made you cookies for after the judging, and it would be sad if you couldn't afford cookies." Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Maria's expression softened. "The judges come around in 10 minutes. You should probably know what you're talking about if you're going to help explain the project." It was permission. Acceptance. An open door. Marcus took it. 6 months later, the view from Marcus's new office was nothing like his old one. No floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. No marble floors or platinum nameplates. Just a converted warehouse in the Bronx, filled with computers and hope and the sound of kids laughing. The Hartwell Foundation for Working Families. Not charity, partnership. Job training, childcare support, education programs, legal assistance. Everything Marcus wished had existed when he was the invisible kid in the system. Maria ran operations. Turned out, a woman who'd managed 3 jobs and a daughter on poverty wages was better at resource management than most MBAs. Elena came by every day after school, doing homework in the corner office, Marcus's corner office, though it had a couch instead of a conference table and star stickers instead of stock tickers on the walls. He'd kept the telescope. Some nights, when the work was done and the city lights dimmed just enough, Marcus and Elena would set it up on the roof. Maria would join them sometimes, bringing coffee and those chocolate chip cookies that had started everything. They'd look at Saturn's rings, promises between planets. At Jupiter protecting its smaller neighbors. At stars that were really light from the past, reaching across impossible distances to touch the present. Do you miss it? Elena asked one night, her eye pressed to the telescope. Being the boss of everything? Marcus thought about it. About the empire he'd lost. About the crown he'd set down. About the fortress that had finally, completely crumbled. No, he said truthfully. I don't miss being the boss of everything. But I really like being part of something. Maria handed him a coffee. Their fingers brushed. Comfortable now, familiar. That's growth, she said softly. It was growth. Painful, terrifying, beautiful growth. Marcus Hartwell had spent his whole life climbing to the top of the mountain, alone. He'd thought the view from up there would make the isolation worth it. But the real view, the one that actually mattered, was right here. In a warehouse in the Bronx, surrounded by people who saw him not as the Ice King or the fallen tycoon, but as Marcus. Just Marcus. Friend. Partner. Protector of smaller planets. Everyday hero. Mr. Marcus, Elena said, still peering through the telescope. You were right about the light. I can see Saturn's rings. They're beautiful. They are, Marcus agreed. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at the stars alone. He was home. The end. What did you think? Marcus Hartwell's journey from isolation to connection, from empire to family, reminds us that the walls we build to protect ourselves often become the prisons that trap us. That real wealth isn't what we hoard, but what we share. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what actually matters. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the fortresses in your own life, or if you simply want more stories that dig deep into what it means to be human, ***, hit that subscribe button, ***. Every week, I bring you cinematic, emotionally gripping stories about real people navigating extraordinary circumstances. Stories about redemption, connection, and the courage it takes to choose vulnerability over invincibility. Subscribe now so you never miss a story that could change how you see the world. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have chosen? The boardroom or the science fair? The empire or the connection? Let's talk about it. And remember, like Marcus learned, sometimes the smallest gesture, offered freely, can crack open even the most fortified heart. See you in the next story.